Good day everyone, I'll be discussing reading aloud. So reading aloud is an instructional practice for teachers, parents, and caregivers. Read text aloud to children. So the readers in here will incorporate variation in pitch, tone, pace, volume, poses, eye contact, questions, and comments to produce a fluent and enjoyable delivery. So when we read aloud to students, we expand their imaginations, provide knowledge, support language acquisitions, and of course we build vocabulary and promote reading as worthwhile, enjoyable delivery. So in reading aloud, we have three strategies. First one is we have overgeneralization. So Littlewood 1984 observes overgeneralization as a fundamental learning strategy in all domains, not only in language. In generalization, one constructs categories and create rules to predict how different items will behave. Sometimes the prediction is right and sometimes it is wrong. And here, in case the learner's result of generalization is wrong, the source of language rule in generalization they will use will determine the kind of error. Errors that are derived from generalization of L2 rule are labeled as intringular error. On the other hand, if the learners generalize L1 rule, the errors caused by it are labeled as interlingual errors. Number 2 is we have transfer. It has similarity and difference with the previously mentioned overgeneralization. The distinction between them is related to the source of knowledge in using it. So, according to Littlewood 1984, the similarity between pronouns, etc. In addition to that, both language from words in the same way by attaching prefixes and suffixes to the root word. Above and beyond, they have transitive and intransitive form, passive and active voice, and use similar numbering and punctuation system. Moreover, symbols and capitalization are nearly the same for both languages, and there are many words that are identical. So last one is we have simplification by omission. So simplification is last strategy that is proposed by Littlewood 1984. His statement asserts that this strategy refers to the process of fitting the confusing linguistic data into a framework of categories that learners has already processed. Besides, readers makes this confusing rule to the more manageable one. So that would be all for my discussion. Thank you.
My name is Mercedes and I will be discussing about choral reading. So first, what is choral reading? Choral reading is reading aloud, but reading aloud with a group of people in unison or simultaneously. So why is this important? Why is this important to do in school? There are 4 listed reasons here as to why choral reading is important. And first, the fact that it helps improve the ability to read. It helps the student improve the reading and speaking skills. Second, it provides a model for fluent reading. So the reading where the students can listen to, which helps improve the students' fluency in speaking. Third, it also provides less skilled readers time to practice and the opportunity to practice and receive support before being required to read on their own, which helps boost the students' level of self-confidence and motivation. So there are different ways to do choral reading. One is to divide your group in 2 or 3 subgroups and take turns in reading different pages. Or everyone in the class can just read the whole passage together. Third, the boys read different lines while the girls read. You separate the boys from the girls and they both read different lines. Or the teacher can models how to read a sentence and then the students follow and read the same sentence the teacher just read. That is the importance and ways to do choral reading, and now the following will is an example taken from YouTube. The link will be provided in your handouts.
Next is silent reading. The definition is the word itself, meaning reading silently. We read silently every day, from reading signs, messages, or even subtitles to your favorite K-dramas or anime. But to formally define this, silent reading is actually a reading skill which allows one to read without voicing the words. This may involve subvocalization or silent speech. Simply, instead of actually listening to the sounds we created orally, we imagine the sounds in our heads. So, why do we let our students read silently, even and especially poetry? This is because reading silently improves students' understanding because it helps them concentrate and focus on what they are reading, rather than the pronunciation of the individual words. So, when we read silently, we can form mental pictures of the poems we read. Also, understanding, creating meaning, and acquiring the message intended by the author of the poem is maximized. Now, the question is, how do we teach or apply silent reading in our classroom? First is to choose the appropriate literatures for your students. According to the New York State Department of Education, we can follow these three criteria in choosing literary text. First is the quantitative elements of a text, such as the word length, word frequency, and sentence length. If you're teaching in high school, it is okay to choose literature that have complex words to increase your students' vocabulary or skill in context clues. Second of the criteria is the qualitative factors of a text, such as the meaning or the purpose, the text structure, the language conventions, and clarity. So, is the message or the purpose of the poem appropriate in their developmental stage? This is one of the questions you should answer in this criteria. So, third of the criteria is the reader and the task or considerations that reflect characteristics of the specific reader, such as the reader's background, the motivation, and knowledge about the topic, and the specific tasks, such as the purpose and complexity of the task and the questions asked. Simply be sensitive enough. If you know that the literary piece might have taboos or prejudice, will you be able to supply or find connections to the subject? If not, better look for something else. So second of the strategy is to equip your students with reading strategies. So reiterate to your students how to decode letters and words and give meaning. Third is to give them a specific purpose in reading. This is to stimulate your students' curiosity and motivation by encouraging valuable questions and tinkering. Fourth is the guided discussion. Have the students write their responses. You will know when a student is struggling in comprehension if they are unable to formulate a written response. Fifth is to challenge them. Challenge their comprehension by asking questions. How much have they realized or understand in the literature? Were they able to create relevance of this poem to their lives? Sixth and the last strategy is the opportunities. Give them opportunities. Allow and introduce students to choose from a variety of poetry genres and to give them opportunity to share and compare their thoughts with their classmates. So that's all for silent reading. Let's move on to the next topic.
Now let's talk about literary appreciation and valuing in or of poetry. So, literature has great values such as the following on our list on our PowerPoint presentation. Now, what is literary appreciation? Literary appreciation, according to Ugamili, posits that literary appreciation refers to the evaluation of works of imaginative literature as an intellectual or academic exercises. In this process, the reader interprets, evaluates, or classifies a literary work with a view to determining the artistic merits or demerits of such a work. Now, on the second statement, Donaldson and Nelson echo this sentiment. This means that the reader is able to gain pleasure and understanding for the literature, understand its values and importance, and admire its complexity. Now, on the third statement, it talks about Margaret Early's stages of growth and literary appreciation. So, Early's stages of growth states that these stages which readers go through are added onto without dropping the previous stages. Thus, literary appreciation is a lifelong process. Now, how about poetry? We all know that poetry is a genre of literature. And there are elements of poetry such as the form, the sound devices, imagery, mode or tone, and the theme. Now let's start with the form or the structure. So a poem's form, a poem's form is its appearance, and poems are divided into lines and stanzas. Well, these stanzas function like a paragraph in a story. Each one contains a single idea that takes the idea one step further, like the example on the presentation. Now, how about sound devices? Some poems use techniques, sounds such as the rhythm, the rhyme, alliteration, consonants, assonance, and the onomatopoeia. So let's go to imagery. Poets use words that appeal to the reader's sense of sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Like example again on our presentation. So how about mode and tone? Mode and tone, it is the author's words of choices for the poem given to the poem. So how about the theme? The last one, the theme of the poem is its central or main idea.
Lesson design in teaching poetry.
So
what is poetry? So poetry is one of our most important forms of art and expressions. Teaching poetry in schools allows students to understand different points of view and emotions. It also plays a pivotal role in connecting students to their feelings at deeper levels while helping them become more empathetic and accepting. So, what are the strategies in teaching poetry? So in here, we have 10 tips to effectively teach poetry. And number 1 is introduce poetry with poems that your students can relate to. So you have to hook your students on poetry from the get-go. Because many of them preconceive notion that poetry is very boring, especially for older folks and for girls and others. And it is your job to hook them. Number 2, you have to read each poem aloud to students more than once. So I firmly believe that in reading a poem at least twice, often on the first reading, because students are so engrossed in the story the poem is trying to tell, and that they miss all of the poetry elements. By reading a poem in a second time around, students can start to listen for the important components, and they will discover things not seen before. So when you reread the poem, you ask the students for patterns and for the overall flow of the words. Number 3, you have to set up a poetry corner in your classroom. You have to learn about the poet prior to reading their poetry. So a lot of poets write poems about their mood, life events, family, and relationship, and nature. First, learn as much as you can about the poet. Wherein in what time of period did he or she live. Understanding the time period can Understanding the time period of the poem was written and background of the poet is essential to drawing conclusions about the poem's meaning. Number 5. You have to spend time analyzing poetry to really understand the author's purpose. So the fun part of analyzing poetry is figuring out what the poet was trying to say. So this is where the use of figurative language comes in. It's what makes the poetry have the music-like rhythm and flow. It's the flow of the words, the rhythm of the beat, pattern of the syllables. It's the words carefully chosen to create images in the reader's mind. It's really important that you can spend time reading the poems yourself and fully understand it before you attempt to teach it to students. So teaching children to analyze poetry isn't one of those things you can just pick up and teach. Some poems really are hard for adults to understand, let alone ask students to understand. You really need to spend time thinking, reflecting, asking questions about what you have read, and really understand the poem yourself. Number 6. You have to start each day with a read aloud poem. So I like to start off each day during the poetry unit with a read aloud. Kids really enjoy hearing poems and the writing voice of different authors. If you aren't big into reading, you can put a YouTube video of someone performing poetry rereading as well. So Shel Silvertain has recorded quite a few videos on YouTube and use a great voice to read them. Remember to read a variety of poems so that you can reach all of your kids. So number 7. Teach figurative language to help students better understand the poem's meaning. So some poems require very basic surface level understanding, while other poems are challenging to grasp what the poet is really trying to say. So poems often use metaphors, similes, onomatopoeia, alliteration, idioms, and other figurative language. Teach students the meaning of these kinds of figurative language. Understanding this poetic device will help them unlock the meaning hidden within some poems and allows for deeper critical thinking. Number 8. Get excited when you teach poetry. Let loose. So when you really enjoy reading and responding to poetry, your students will pick up on your excitement. Use the funny voices when you read aloud, laugh at the funny parts, and that's it. Number 9. Give the kids a chance to write their own poetry. Solidify students' love for poetry, let them write. You can provide them with many different styles. Alliteration, haikus, for example, I am, 5 sentences, concrete, and etc. As long as the students are writing poetry, we don't mind. Teach students that poetry doesn't have to rhyme. Let them experience the fun of writing their own poems about what interests them. Lastly, encourage students to share their poetry. So once the students have written some poetry of their own, let them show it off. There are a few ways I like to do this. So number 1, you can pair up the students, allow them to share their written works in buddy pairs. This is great because it's a small group and helps build classroom relationship and confidence. I also encourage students to share the kind of feedbacks the poem their partner wrote. Number 2, have students read their poem aloud to the class. This is also nice because it helps foster public speaking skills and students get to share with the whole class a poem they wrote and are proud of. Lastly, display their written works on the wall. Oftentimes, my Oftentimes, the students write their own poetry and add pictures to go with it, and it makes decor in your classroom. So that's all. I hope you have learned something about the strategies on how to teach a poetry to your students. Thank you.
So let's talk about the materials and resources in teaching poetry. So when it comes to materials, there are two types, the student's copy and the teacher's notes. When it comes to the student's copy, it includes the copy of the literary pieces, specifically the poem that the teacher will teach to students. When it comes to teacher's notes, it is all about the reference of the said poem as well as the criteria on how will the teacher will judge the activity that the student will accomplish during that time. So, let's move on to the resources in teaching poetry. For the website, the first one is the Poetry Foundation. Poetry Foundation includes the current news and events on what is happening around us, as well as it includes the 1,000 poets who you can find your favorite poets, and then their biography is also included there. The next one is Poetry Out Loud. Here, I recommend this one because you can see or you can watch poets who are reading their own pieces. By that, you can also feel what they are feeling. You can feel what the readers want you to feel. Also, you can get some strategies on how to recite a poem. It's specifically for teachers on how they will teach the student on how to really read the poem in a right way. So the next one is Poetry Teachers. It's like the same as the Poetry Out Loud. It includes strategies on how to write and perform a poem. Also, if a teacher wants to really engage the students in teaching poetry, she can buy or purchase a cheapest book from this site. Then the next one is the Poetry Archive. So it doesn't only include one person. This type of website includes everyone. Everyone is welcome in here because it focuses or it targets a lot of audience, a large number of audience to be exact. And also, if you want to read something that is funny, sad, or something that is new, or something that is new to you, or something that you feel right now, for example, it relates to what you feel right now, you can read it there. And the last one for the website, book. If here, the teacher can find or the students can find the real meaning of poetry, and also it includes or offers hundreds of poems. It includes Why Should I Care section. So why should you care for literature, for poetry? Because sometimes we know that if we read poetry, we somewhat relate our lives with it, So why should you care? Why should you care about the poetry? Because in there, you can express what you feel, your ideas, your insights. And let's move on to the apps. For the first one is the Poetry Daily. So poems are introduced daily from the word itself. Every day you will receive a poem. You can archive and save your favorite poems in here. Number 2 is Shakespeare. From the word itself, we all know that what Shakespeare is. It is all about the works of William Shakespeare. Here, it is not all about, it's all about William Shakespeare, but you can also find answers to your unfamiliar words. If you are not aware about the unfamiliar words, you can directly put in there, and then the answer will just pop up. And And then the next one is verses. So this is a nice, this is a nice app because not only you can get poem or you can read poem, but also you can also share your poem with other people, right? Because you can express your feelings, opinions, and insights, ideas about something that is maybe bothering you or inspiring you, or something like that. So it is also an access to built-in rhyming dictionary to look for rhymes. So most of poems here in verses are in rhymes. So the next one is poetry everywhere. So just like the other website, it is also an access to poems that the authors or the writers are reading. You can watch them read their own pieces of literature. So the last one is American poetry. It includes 5,000 poems by 50 of America's famous poets. So thank you for listening. That's all.
And for our last topic, let us discuss about the assessment in teaching poetry. First, let us define assessment. Assessment is the systematic process of documenting and using empirical data to measure knowledge, skills, attitudes, belief, and works of students. By taking the assessment, teachers try to improve the students' path towards learning. Assessment is embedded in the learning process. It is a catalyst for teachers to reflect upon what and how they teach. Assessment plays an important role in learning and motivation as it helps students to know and identify their areas of strengths and weaknesses. And that is why assessment is one of the most challenging work of a teacher. So how do we assess poetry? So here are some assessment tools that can help teacher assess poetry. So first is by the use of rubric. So rubric is effective and efficient tool which allow for objective and consistent assessment of a range of performances, assignments, and activities. Rubrics can help clarify expectation and will show students how to meet them, making students accountable for their performance in an easy-to-follow format. The feedback that students receive through a rubric can help them improve their performance on revised or subsequent work. So, rubrics can help to rationalize grades when students ask about your method of assessment. So, there are two types of rubrics. First is holistic rubric and the analytical or analytic rubric. So, holistic rubric is good for evaluating overall performance on a task. Only one score is given and tends to be easier to score. However, holistic rubrics do not provide detailed information on student performance for each criterion. The levels of performance are treated as a whole. While analytic rubric, each criterion is assessed separately using different descriptive ratings. So each criterion receives a separate score. So analytic rubrics take more time to score but provide more detailed feedback. So the second assessment tool is rating scale. Rating scale allows teachers to indicate the degree or frequency of the behavior, skills, and strategies displayed by the learner. Rating scales state the criteria of provide 3 or 4 response selections to describe the quality or frequency of student. Teachers can use rating scales to record observation and students can use them as self-assessment tools. Teaching students to use descriptive words such as always, usually, sometimes, and never helps them pinpoint specific strengths and needs. So rating scale also gives students information for setting goals and improving performance. In a rating scale, the descriptive words is more important than the related number. So the more precise and descriptive the words for each scale point, the more reliable the tool is. So the third one is checklist. Checklists are assessment tools that set out specific criteria. Checklists set out skills, attitudes, strategies, and behaviors for evaluation and offer ways to systematically organize information about a student or group of students. So generally speaking, checklists consist of a set of statements that corresponds to specific criteria, like the answer to each statement is just either yes or no or done or not done. So the fourth one is journals. Journaling serves several purposes: reflection, critical thinking, and connection. So when completed as a reflection of progress, journaling allows students to review where they started and track their improvements. So journaling also encourages students to think critically about their work. They also provide a space of experimentation with new poetic and writing techniques. The fifth one is reading response. In reading response, the reader is essential to the meaning of a text, for they bring the text to life. The purpose of a reading response is examining, explaining, and defending your personal reaction to a text. So the challenge part of a reader response is to show how you connected with the text. And lastly, literary criticism. Literary criticism is the comparison, analysis, interpretation, and or evaluation of works of literature. Literary criticism is essentially an opinion supported by evidence relating to theme, style, setting, or holistical or political context. It usually includes discussion of the work's content and integrates your idea with other insights gained from research. So researching, reading, and writing works of literary criticism will help you to make better sense of the work, form judgments about literature, study ideas from different points of view, and determine on an individual level whether a literary work is worth reading. And that is the 6 assessment tools that can help teachers assess a poetry.